When we think of airplanes, it's almost impossible not to think of Boeing. From dominating commercial aviation to controlling the military aircraft market during World War II, this aerospace giant has done it all. But how did it all begin? How did Boeing rise to such power? And how did one company become tied to more deaths than you could ever imagine? Stay tuned to find out. Boeing's journey to becoming the king of aviation began in 1916, during the early days of aviation. Founded by William E. Boeing in Seattle, Washington, the company was originally named Pacific Aero Products Co. and entered the aviation industry when it was still in its early years. Armed with little more than a passion for flight and a bit of ambition, Boeing's first creations were seaplanes. But it didn't take long for the company to aim higher, much higher. In fact, by the 1930s, the company had already crafted the Boeing 247, an innovative twin-engine airliner, which was among the first to feature all-metal construction and a fully retractable landing gear. This wasn't just an airplane at the time, it was the future of air travel, a future that, according to Boeing, was just getting started. Fast forward to the late 1950s, and they once again pushed the limits. At the time, the world was on the brink of something revolutionary: jet travel. Riding this wave, Boeing released the Boeing 707 in 1958, a plane that would become the first jet airliner to make commercial flights affordable and efficient. In every sense, the 707 was a game changer, transforming long-distance flights from an expensive, exclusive affair into something within reach for the everyday traveler. It was so innovative that, in no time, airlines around the world clamored for a piece of Boeing's magic. And soon enough, you could fly from New York to London in just 7 hours, a journey that had previously taken days by ocean liner. At this time, the company had solidified itself as the king of the skies. But much like Icarus, they aimed higher. Unlike the Greek tragedy, Boeing didn't aim for the sun, but for something new altogether. And in the 1970s, they delivered. Hitting another milestone, Boeing forever altered the aviation landscape with the iconic Boeing 747, also known as the Jumbo Jet. With its massive wingspan and double-decker design, this plane was an airline's holy grail, capable of carrying over 400 passengers all at once. To many, it wasn't just an airplane, it was a flying palace. Just imagine the sheer excitement of everyday people stepping onto a plane with rooms, lounges, and seats designed for comfort, not just travel. And imagine all this happening at a time when air travel was for the elite and super wealthy. For the first time, flying wasn't just about getting from point A to point B. It was an experience, a luxury, a story to be told. In more ways than anyone ever expected, the 747 brought the world closer together, opening up global travel for families, business people, and tourists alike. But here's the crazy thing. Throughout this golden era, Boeing wasn't just creating airplanes, they were crafting dreams. The company's planes became symbols of luxury, progress, and possibility. The 727, 737, and 767 followed, each more innovative than the last, with Boeing continuously raising the bar in comfort, speed, and efficiency. It was a time when Boeing seemed unstoppable. However, nothing stays that way forever. And soon enough, Williams' dreams for Boeing were put on hold as comfort was replaced with bombs, gun turrets replaced lounges, and the skies turned from wonder to terror. Almost overnight, Boeing soared to new heights and took part in actions that would end thousands of lives. They became the angels of death and the engineers of destruction. But how? Today, for many people, it's hard to imagine Boeing planes as warplanes. After all, these aircraft are the epitome of comfort and luxury. But much like the humans they carried, Boeing has a dark side. In fact, based on 2022 revenue, the company is the 4th largest defense contractor in the world. But how did we get here? After all, at one point, flying with Boeing wasn't just a flight, it was an experience. Well, to understand that, we have to take a little dive into the bloodiest war the world has ever seen, World War II. In the mid-20th century, Boeing had already become a pioneer in civilian aviation. And honestly, they were performing excellently in the field. But as mentioned before, they decided to copy Icarus again and began to spread their wings into the military sector. Now, to be fair, the shift wasn't immediate, but it was ultimately inevitable. And soon enough, the company's engineers, who had spent decades perfecting the art of commercial flight, found themselves working on something far more dangerous: military aircraft. As you would expect, Boeing's entry into the world of defense was not about luxury. Oh no, it was about power, precision, and technology on a scale that the world had never seen before. And perhaps the best example of this was the monster they unleashed on the world in 1941, the B-17 Flying Fortress. One of the most popular bombers in the world, the B-17 Flying Fortress was a heavy bomber that became synonymous with Allied air superiority during World War II. But here's the thing. Even though the B-17 effectively dominated the field, Boeing had gotten a taste of blood, and for some reason didn't stop there. They kept pushing boundaries, and soon enough they gave the world the B-52 Stratofortress. Now, if this plane sounds familiar, it's because the B-52 was a long-range bomber that could carry nuclear payloads across oceans and continents. That's right, Boeing designed planes that released the power of the sun on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Designed in the 1950s, the B-52 became one of the most enduring military machines in history. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a harbinger of devastation, capable of raining destruction from thousands of feet above the earth. And again, that was just the beginning. As Boeing's role in military aviation deepened, the company unleashed a new breed of fighter jets, the FA-18 Hornet, which soared into the skies in the 1970s, became a staple for the US Navy, proving its worth in countless conflicts. Fast, nimble, and versatile, it was the Swiss Army knife of the skies, performing a multitude of roles from air superiority to ground attack. Then came the Apache AH-64 helicopter, which, as we all know, is a formidable ground attack aircraft that quickly became a go-to for the US Army. And that was all thanks to its advanced targeting systems and relentless firepower, which turned it into a nightmare for enemy forces. From the CH-47 Chinook to the F-15 Eagle, Boeing was on a roll as it provided warship after warship. Sure, at the moment it looked like Boeing's transition from passenger jets to military machines was a tale of triumph, and to a degree it was, but it wasn't without its darker chapters. You see, as the company's planes began dominating the skies, so too did the ethical dilemmas. You see, while Boeing was creating masterpieces of military technology, it was also selling these weapons to regimes with very controversial track records. From the Middle East to Latin America, Boeing's bombs, planes, and helicopters found their way into the hands of governments with dubious human rights practices. A good example of this was when Boeing's F-15 fighter jets were supplied to Saudi Arabia, a country that, if you didn't know, has a well-documented history of human rights abuses, particularly related to its military actions in Yemen. And sure, you could say this was purely a business deal, but Saudi Arabia's involvement in the Yemen conflict was mainly airstrikes. Airstrikes that resulted in significant civilian casualties, as you would expect, have raised multiple alarms. But despite the international outcry, the US government has continued to approve arms sales to Saudi Arabia, including, you guessed it, Boeing's F-15s. These planes have been used in operations that have been linked to violations of international humanitarian law, with civilian infrastructure targeted in these airstrikes. But that's not all, because even recently the company has still been at the head of controversy, as Israel's use of Boeing Apache helicopters in Palestinian territories has sparked an outcry, especially during the Gaza conflicts. For those who aren't familiar with the situation, these helicopters have been used for air raids that have led to numerous civilian casualties, including those in heavily populated areas. It's gotten so bad that the Israeli military's use of the Apache helicopters in these operations has been heavily criticized by human rights organizations, such as Human Rights Watch and the United Nations, which claim that the attacks often violated international law by targeting civilian areas. But once again, despite the controversy, Boeing has continued to sell Apache helicopters to Israel. And if the ethical concerns weren't enough, Boeing's actions often seem to push for more military intervention. Their deep ties to the US military-industrial complex meant that Boeing was often in a position to benefit from conflict. And truth be told, no matter where you stand on these issues, one thing is clear: Boeing didn't just build planes, they built the machinery of war. Thankfully, in recent years, Boeing's military contracts have attracted more scrutiny. Allegations of overcharging, shady dealings, and a lack of transparency have plagued the company, leading to fines and settlements. In fact, a Pentagon audit revealed that Boeing once marked up simple items like soap dispensers by nearly 8,000% for the US Air Force. So, while the company rakes in billions, many are left wondering, just how much is enough? For Boeing, there was no answer as they kept pushing the boundary. And soon enough, they flew too close to the sun. Like clockwork, Boeing's fall from being an aviation giant to a company wrapped in scandal started with the 737 MAX crashes. In 2018 and 2019, two 737 MAX planes crashed, killing 346 people. These crashes sparked something in the world and showed everyone that Boeing had messed up big time. But how? Well, it all goes back to the planes that crashed. The 737 MAX was meant to be a fuel-efficient plane, but Boeing rushed it to market without fixing serious safety flaws, one of which was the MCAS system, a control feature meant to prevent the plane from stalling. Tragically, the system was triggered by a faulty sensor, forcing the plane into a deadly dive. Now, sure, you could argue that this was a freak accident and Boeing had no control, but here's where things get really dicey. It turns out that internal Boeing engineers had warned the company that something was wrong, but their concerns were completely ignored. In fact, instead of taking time to fix the issues, Boeing put profits ahead of safety, leading to one of the biggest disasters in aviation history. And the crazy thing is, the 737 MAX scandal wasn't the first time Boeing had faced safety issues. It turns out the company had a habit of cutting corners to save money, sometimes knowingly risking safety. For example, did you know the iconic 787 Dreamliner had problems with overheating batteries and structural defects? Apparently, before they were even launched, engineers and workers who raised concerns about these issues were brushed aside. And instead of listening to them, Boeing kept pushing forward, showing the world that profits mattered more than passengers' well-being. Although the 737 MAX disaster turned out to be the most high-profile in a while, Boeing's shady side didn't stop there. And that was all thanks to the revolving door between Boeing and the US government. Let me explain. For some weird reasons, executives from Boeing have gone on to work for the Pentagon, CIA, and even the White House, while former government officials have also joined Boeing. This back and forth, as you would expect, raised some serious questions like, is Boeing just following the rules? Or is it using its connections to push policies that keep the war machine running, all for profit? To make things worse, there have also been whispers of Boeing's involvement in war profiteering, as some say the company sold weapons to questionable governments, helping fuel conflicts in exchange for massive profits. Leaked documents and insider stories even suggest that corruption and bribery were part of Boeing's strategy to secure big deals. This is all helped by the fact, from the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of Latin America, Boeing's planes and helicopters have made their way into the hands of governments with very questionable human rights records. F-15s in Egypt have been used in military crackdowns. Apache helicopters in Turkey have targeted Kurdish fighters, and Chinooks in Colombia have supported anti-guerrilla operations tied to human rights abuses. And despite the global outcry, Boeing continues to supply military aircraft, raising ethical concerns about the company's role in enabling repressive regimes and fueling conflicts that cost countless lives. Somehow Boeing's story wasn't just about building planes anymore. It was now about using power and influence to make money at any cost. So now, here's the question. Is there redemption for the company that flew too close to the sun, or are we doomed to burn? As we mentioned before, after the 737 MAX scandal, Boeing faced a massive public relations crisis. In an attempt to rebuild trust, the company made efforts to rebrand itself, focusing on safety and accountability. They grounded the 737 MAX for over a year, and CEO Dennis Muilenburg resigned in the aftermath. Boeing promised to overhaul safety procedures and improve transparency, but it wasn't enough to fully heal the damage. In fact, there were even persistent rumors that Boeing silenced whistleblowers who tried to expose safety issues, including allegations of retaliation and even threats. While these claims remain unproven, some insiders have suggested that Boeing may have gone to extreme lengths to protect its interests, fearing the damage that these revelations could cause. At the same time, Boeing has doubled down on its military projects, launching new weapon systems like the B-21 Raider and continuing its push for defense contracts. In the end, despite its efforts to clean up its image, one question still hangs over Boeing. Is it too big to fail? The company's power in both the aviation and defense industries is hard to ignore. But at what price? And most importantly, is Boeing something the world can't live without? Or is it time to move on and find a better way forward? While the answer may not be clear yet, the impact of its actions will be felt for years to come. But what do you think? Was Boeing just a company trying to survive? Or did they get too comfortable with being the architects of war? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love uncovering the truth behind aviation's biggest players and want more stories about the forces that shape the skies, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the jaw-dropping tales we've got coming up next. Stay curious, stay bold, and as always, we'll see you up in the air, or maybe under the radar.